James, it's kind of interesting when you look at the Old Testament, and particularly you look at Proverbs, we're contrasting Lady Wisdom, Lady Folly. If you look at, let's say, Ecclesiastes, in Ecclesiastes, the author of Ecclesiastes kind of goes through and talks about all the things that he's done and all the things that he's pursued. And in the end, he comes to the conclusion that everything was vanity or everything was folly. And so he says that, look, everything I tried to pursue was not very good. I should have remembered my Creator in the days when I was young. And he says I should have had a different vision for life. Okay? James, on the other hand, is going to be a little bit more nuanced for us. Okay? What James is telling us is that there are two types of wisdom. James has kind of laid out that who's wise among you. And then he talks about the idea that there's worldly wisdom. And he's talking about that there is godly wisdom. Now, remember, wisdom is a vision of what is right or what is good. Right? So what James is really telling us is that there are two visions of what is right or what is good. And we choose to pursue one of those visions. You can pursue a vision of worldly good. And the world defines good in a certain way. Or you can choose to pursue godly wisdom or the godly standard of the good. But what we'll see is you cannot pursue both. So James kind of lays out for us that there really are two types of visions of the good, two competing ideas of virtue, and says that you need to choose between the one of them. And he kind of lays out the differences for us. We'll come back and look at these here in a minute.
Okay, this is a pretty radical redefinition of how we discern truth. But this sermon is very helpful because more and more this is the Gnostic approach churches are taking to discerning truth. There are two realities that are pawns of truth, or actually objective truth here in these two different realms, have been changed to a, quote, vision. The vision of the good or the vision of worldly good. And again, this is in-your-face Gnosticism. The, quote, vision of the good is a term that is very familiar for those who study the writings of Socrates and Plato. So, as he mentioned also, only good can be chosen from one of these two visions, okay? And again, it seems that very much so the outcomes also come from this vision of either the good or the worldly good. Now, by and large, what you can do is in that top circle in our day, you can put gospel. And then in the bottom, you can put worldly wisdom or biblicism. It's all the same to them. And a schematic where we contemplate the vision of the good in the top circle, which makes the outcomes, obedience, if you will, a, quote, mere natural flow, okay, is really an interpretive truth model that more and more in our day in the church is what you're going to find. Now, quickly before we move on to the next slide, in regard to Ecclesiastes, his suggestion that Ecclesiastes is mostly in regard to Solomon wanting to put forth the idea that his focus was on a wrong vision of wisdom throughout his whole life is, well, just false. There on the bottom we have the last two verses of Ecclesiastes where Solomon writes, "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." Now, fear God from the mouth of this very same teacher, from for lack of a better term, from the horse's own mouth. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So right here, this verse contradicts the point he's trying to make. If fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, here Solomon jumps, quote, directly from the imperative to obedience, which is a no-no in New Calvinist circles, by the way, as opposed to the imperative command is grounded in the indicative event, i.e., go to that top circle, put gospel there, and that's got to be contemplated on, and then the outcome, obedience, is a mere natural flow. All right? So, also, keep his commandments, that phrase, the keeping of the commandment is indicates or infers that there is already an understanding of what the commandment is and what it required. So this verse of scripture right here, fear God, which he says himself is the beginning of wisdom, and keep his commandments, i.e., apply that knowledge to life, just really contradicts everything that he's been saying thus far.
The kind of interesting thing to note here for me, I think, is that when we begin to think about this idea of virtue and good, we need to kind of understand that there's a difference between moral ideas and ethical ideas. Now, normally we understand those as sort of synonymous. In fact, we use them synonymously, and that's technically not right. Okay? You act morally as an individual. Okay? When you act and you do an action, whether it's a good or a bad action, that is an exercise in your morality. Okay? But generally, when you do that, you will do it from some sort of ethical standard, which is corporate. So if you are a good member of Shawnee Hills Baptist Church, how do you know you're a good member? Because there's sort of a corporate sort of understanding of what it means to be good here. Okay? And you live within that corporate idea of goodness. Okay? And if you act that way, we kind of applaud you and pat you on the back and say, yes, you're a good Christian, way to go. And if you kind of are outside of that, we sort of have our little ways of letting you know, no, you're not quite in there, right, okay. And hopefully, if you still want to be part of us, you kind of mold your attitudes back to get within the good. Make sense? Now, the same thing operates if you think about the larger society. There is a concept out there of what it means to be a good American. And if you're a good American, you hold to certain ideas and you hold to certain values, and we'll let you know that you're a good American if, in fact, you live according to those values and attitudes and virtues and you pursue life that way. And most of us, because we live within that environment, we sort of tend to respond to that because we are communal beings. And so if we begin to understand that these ideas of ethics are really waters that we swim in, and because they're waters that we swim in, they do affect us. And so when we go out there and we are in the bigger ethics of the culture, there are certain attitudes and values that are pressing on us that say, you are a good American if you do this. And the tendency could be that we could bring those attitudes, values, concepts of the good, and bring them into here, where they may not quite align with what God wants us to be and think and act and do. So when we begin to kind of think about James telling us, look, there are two types of virtue, there are two types of wisdom, and you need to choose the right one, he's really kind of saying choose as a group, as a community, you need to kind of choose the right ethical vision from which to follow.
Okay, what we continue to see here is concepts that you would think pretty much of being synonymous, and I think this is like on the third item that he's done this, where he's taken something that you would think as being synonymous and splitting it up into two different groups. Primarily the vision of the good, or the worldly vision of good, or in this case, moral and ethical, and then he has also split up wisdom and knowledge. And this is what Gnosticism does. They don't call it dualism for nothing. So, in this case, he has split up the difference between moralism and ethics, and assigned one to being individual and one to the group. All right, and the primary reason that wisdom and knowledge needed to be split up is he needed to make wisdom the vision part, or the contemplation part of the equation. The rest of everything else is being split up into the vision of the good, which is the group, and also the worldly vision of group, which is assigned to the individual. And he subtly, and if you know anything about Gnosticism and how it relates to the writings of Plato and whatnot, there's also an underlying prejudice against capitalism in general. I don't think, and you'll see in the next slide, he really gets into this heavily, the evils of the individualism is subtly assigned to American culture and kind of capitalism. Like I said, you'll see this in the next slide. So, what we see here, or we're going to see, is this dichotomy between the individual and the group. The individual being inherently evil, the group being inherently good, and the fact that we can really make sound decisions as an individual being a misnomer. And even if he's not saying it's a misnomer, he's clearly saying that James taught that we always choose by group, or what the group chooses or the groups, what the group chooses in regard to the vision of the good, which is ridiculous. But basically what we're going to see here, and what I'm going to touch on later on, is the fact that Gnosticism that came from Platonism is really kissing cousins with straight up communism. In fact, communism came primarily from Plato's underlying presuppositions about man. So I'm not going to touch on this in depth, but we'll see more of this, I think, in the next slide.
About the vision of the good that is out there for a minute. Okay? What does our society, what does our world try to tell us? If you think about it, there are competing messages that we get. For example, fairness is more important than justice in our society. And fairness is, I need to get mine. It needs to be me. Okay? Justice related more toward what's good for the community. We seem as a society to be much more interested in things like consuming goods, which is, I consume them, okay, as compared to creating goods, which would be for the benefit of everyone. Okay? We seem to be much more interested in things like fame. Fame is pretty important to us, rather than really truly accomplishing something. Okay? I mean, why in the world is Ryan Seacrest so famous? Okay? What has he done? I mean, he's got the best job in the world. He gets to be on TV for the simple reason that he's famous. What have you done? I don't know, but I'm famous. Okay, we'll put you on. Okay? What a great gig to have. All right, but glamour and beauty seem to be more important than character. Image is more important than holiness. I mean, there was a tagline for Sprite once, image is everything. Okay? Just as kind of an example, think about how people get their news now. Most people tend to get their news from sources that agree with their own opinion. Okay? We've sort of substituted opinion for true knowledge. And what that ends up doing in the end, again, all of these, me versus the group, me versus the group, me versus the group, in the end, this becomes very divisive. Okay? It tends to pull apart at us. In the end, we start treating other people as competitors. It divides us. We see people as the enemy. In many ways, we turn to objectify people. Oh, he's just an idiot for believing that. Okay? And what doesn't happen is we don't have unity. Okay? We tend to end up with division. Now, this is sort of exactly what James predicts. So if you kind of turn to James chapter 3, the passage that we read this morning, note that James really does kind of lay out certain characteristics of what happens if you follow this worldly vision. What are the results of this? Right? And he notes that the first one is bitter jealousy. Okay? What he means here is that we seek our own benefit. Okay? We're not willing to share with others. James, as he uses this term, he uses it in sort of a religious context. It kind of leads to a type of religious zeal or zealotry. And if you kind of think about the history of religion throughout the centuries, there's been an awful lot of times where religion has been used, whether we're talking Christianity or other religions, have been used to sort of promote a particular agenda, an us versus them kind of mentality. Okay? And he notes that this is sort of one of the characteristics of worldly wisdom. We are prone to selfish ambitions. We seek to promote our own ends. And we tend to do that at the exclusion of other people. So we start to use people if we can. In fact, I will try to pursue certain ways of gaining power so that I can pursue my agenda over your agenda. Okay? And that might mean acquiring wealth because wealth gives me power. Okay? It might mean gaining position because position could give me power. It might mean cultivating beauty because beauty and sex appeal may give me power over people. But there's lots of ways that we can go to cultivate power. And all of those kind of come out of this idea of selfish ambition because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to seek our own end. Arrogance. Note that James tells us that worldly wisdom leads to a type of arrogance. What it means is that you believe in yourself. Okay? You believe in your own vision. It's a type of, James is kind of laying out, it's your sovereignty, it's your desire for autonomy that comes out and it makes you arrogant. Now suddenly your vision of the world becomes the vision for the world. And everyone has to sort of get in line with what you think is the right thing to do. That's self-deception. Okay? Notice that sometimes we become unwilling and unable to learn from others. We become unteachable at a certain level. Part of that is because of this arrogance that is cultivated, but part of it is that we are unwilling to see things the way they really are. In the end, all of this leads to division. As worldly wisdom continues to grow, and as worldly wisdom sort of becomes the wisdom for a group of people, the end result will always be, as James says, division. It will lead to quarreling. It will lead to fighting. It will lead to everyone, it leads to, as Jesus said, a house divided, which will not stand. Because everyone is now doing, as the author of Judges says, everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. Right? So in the end, worldly wisdom, James kind of points out, has this divisive, this corrosive, this kind of effect that pulls people apart. Because now everyone wants to pursue their own end. Now, obviously when we present this characteristic of worldly wisdom, it doesn't look too attractive, does it? It's like, no, I don't want to be that. In fact, I'm not that anyway. Okay? I am more godly in this regard. Okay? Because you can lay out this way, worldly, godly, okay? These people don't look very nice. And you don't really want to be around people like this. Okay? Which begs the question, might we be people like this? We certainly don't want to think that we are. Okay? Now, James, you have to understand, James is probably the first book of the New Testament that was written. And James is a sort of, if anything else about James, he's really a good psychologist. James understands the human heart. And he understands in our sin nature, what our natural inclinations, what our natural affections tend to lead us. And he's sort of warning us that be careful of this, because if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And so he's kind of letting us know that there is this type of wisdom that can be corrosive if you let it take hold of you. Okay? Now, it's kind of interesting that James writes this, and then several decades later, we find this whole issue coming to fruition.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Until I heard this sermon, when I heard this sermon, a lot of things I've studied and written back in the past kind of all came together. And with this, listening to this sermon and this church that we visited has done to me is really helped it all come together in regard to an understanding of what makes new Calvinist churches tick. And really, authentic, hardcore, Reformed theology in general. Okay? And, look, really kind of creepy the way he reiterated, said over and over again, me against the group, me against the group, me against the group, as the root cause of division. And I mean, look, if you're going to go to that church, check your individualism at the door, eh? Is there any doubt about that? Whoa. And I don't know how deeply this church is indoctrinated in this viewpoint, but if it is, it would certainly make any of your objections about anything that's going on dead on arrival. So if you're going to go to a church like that, you just keep your mouth shut and you go along with the group. Look, the Bible has a lot to say about individualism. The Apostle Paul said that it is as much as possible be dependent on ourselves, so that we can help other people better. Clearly, the Bereans, when they heard Paul preach, weren't interested in what the whole group had to say. They searched the scriptures for themselves to see if what Paul was teaching was true. You can't help, especially in this last slide here, listening to this guy. I mean, you're just thinking communism, socialism, fascism. Whoa. I mean, and I don't think that I had ever seen clearly. I knew in the past, that there were similarities, but this sermon that I listened to from this guy really brings it together in my mind how closely connected communism is with Reformed theology. And, research strongly indicates that they came from the same source anyway. Just a few comments here before we move on to the next part. We see here, if you look at my red arrow, why does it have to be either or? Where is the balance? Where is the balance in this sermon? Individualism is completely of the devil, and everything is about the group. The group is all one on the vision of the good. Notice also that, where does he talk about the scriptures specifically? Yes, he's proof texting, doing a lot of proof texting, but what seems to replace a reference to the biblical text, or what the Bible says, is this whole vision of the good. Anyway, where's the balance? Individualism is of the devil, the group is of the good. Any kind of focus on yourself or reliance upon yourself at all is arrogance. Really just kind of creepy. I've done some other writings on the doctrine of centralism, which is the doctrine of control. It seeks to undermine individualism for the purpose of controlling the individual. And of course, this is the crux of communism and socialism. So this is just has really cleared up a lot of things in my mind with this whole issue. On to part number 4. Thank you for stopping by and listening.